Welcome back to the Sisterhood, David.
Thank you for having me back. I was honored you all reached out.
Well, you are on our greatest hits on the Open Door Sisterhood podcast. So we are so happy to have you back. But for those who maybe didn't catch that episode, can you tell a little bit about yourself?
I would be happy to. So, I am a therapist. I have been practicing at this amazing place in Nashville, Tennessee called Daystar Counseling for almost 25 years now, and is a place I'm really proud to call home, both my city and this setting. And the whole focus for us within my practice is working with the pediatric population. So we only see children, adolescents, and families. That's our whole focus. And we do the work a little different in that we're in a house rather than an office complex. And we are all very clear about the fact that the most sought after therapists in our practice are therapy dogs. We have 5 therapy dogs on staff, and we're all aware we're in line behind them. I have had countless clients over the years that I thought, I think they may have forgotten my name, but they know my dog's name. Then I'm fine with that. But that's a snapshot of where the work we do is a little different. Obviously, not just the setting, but we take a very relational approach because we really believe that relationship is the context for all change. And so, to the degree that kids really feel seen and known, I think is really the birthplace for a lot of growth to happen, and have been incredibly grateful to be here. In addition to a lot of kids, teenagers, and families I've had the privilege of working with, I have 3 kids of my own. My wife and I just celebrated our 25th wedding anniversary during
Oh,
COVID. Thank you.
congratulations.
Thank you. I have so much respect for the fact that she's dealt with me for 25 years. That just is, she needs a medal for that, really. Nobel Peace Prize. And I am incredibly grateful for our 3 kids. I have, my oldest is a girl. And then you all probably remember me sharing before, we got a bit of a surprise after her birth. We got pregnant again and found out not until midway through our pregnancy at our ultrasound that we were having twins. And
Yeah.
it's news we're still recovering from today. And we became parents of twin boys shortly after my daughter came on the scene. So we had 3 kids in diapers, 3 kids in car seats, 3 kids in a stage of life with just a lot of needs. So our
Yeah.
house looked like nothing more than survival for a long
Totally.
period of time. But I'm excited to encourage any parent who's in the throes of that season to say there are different seasons. And so I was about to say I have 3 adolescents, but I don't. I have 2 adolescents and I have a young adult. My daughter is no longer a teenager, and she's a college student now. And thankful that the circumstances of COVID meant for us that we got to be with her a lot more. It was, I think, an incredibly difficult thing for a lot of college kids to launch and taste independence and then have to come back home. And it was a gift to those of us who sent kids away to get to have them back when we were thinking, I'm not going to see you for a long time. And now you're home again. Yeah. So what was hard for them, I think, was maybe great for us.
Mm-hmm. Isn't that true, though, with teenagers in general, that whatever is good for them is often hard for us? And then the flip is also true.
That you are 100% right.
Whatever the opposite of what I just said is also true, that they, when things are good for them, the pain of parenting is real, but we can also know that they're doing well if things are going well, that leaving and cleaving pain is there. And it's there right now for parents with COVID on top of it, and figuring all of that out as kids are trying to become more independent, and their independence has been squelched at home. So fun to be the squelcher, right?
Yes.
And so that's put in a unique, I think, tension on parents the last 12 months as we have parented teenagers, and continue to help them make decisions and deal with limitations and so many no's that are just in their face. It is hard to know how to navigate. So that is why we have you here, because I think you will help us navigate those hard pain points.
I'm excited we're going to have this conversation because it feels necessary, and not just as we finish out for however long this pandemic lasts, but the skills that kids need for when they're on the other side of this, but just dealing with the heartache of life, that, that truth of what we're promised in Romans, that we're going to groan with all of creation this side of heaven, and we're going to taste that and experience that. Our kids are as well, in so many different ways. So I do think we have been given quite an opportunity to develop the skills to navigate the discomfort of life in a unique way. And I would say for all the hard things that have existed with this, I would say that's a good thing. I think it's forced our hands as families to sit front row to maybe where we don't have some of those skills in place, and then seeing where our kids may not have those skills in place, but opportunity for us to still develop those.
That's a really good way to put it. Well, so we do really want to talk about the emotions of teenagers today, but I thought we'd take a little bit of a 30,000-foot peek and just say, why are emotions important? What actually are they? And what part do they play in our development?
It's a great question, and a really good foundation, I think, for the conversation I hope to share in our time together. I think they are of not just great importance, I would say the utmost importance, and a part of where we are seeing these climbing statistics, the rates of anxiety and depression being at an all-time high, the rates of suicide and self-harm. We've never seen numbers like this. I think, in my mind, being indicative of the fact that we haven't done as much as I'd love for us to be doing in terms of helping kids develop what we call emotional muscles. And think about all the different cognitive muscles or cognitive skills that we want to see kids develop throughout their academic journey so that they can launch into whatever aspect of life they want to launch into in terms of just continued learning and growth. We want to see kids developing emotional and social muscles as well. And I think every one of us could point to at least one adult we know in our life who got roadblocked somewhere along the way. They kept going chronologically, but they clearly got stuck somewhere emotionally. And so we know what that looks like. And I hope that, alongside those scary statistics, can create some urgency for us to help kids develop in that space. And as a part of why a couple of years ago, I co-authored a book with two of my colleagues, Melissa Trevathan and Sissy Goff, called Are My Kids on Track? And it's 4 emotional, 4 social, and 4 spiritual milestones that we want to see the kids we love moving toward, but that we in our work are seeing less evidence of than any other time. And again, COVID has forced that to the surface in terms of looking at all of what we're seeing at this point. And what we did, and if you'd allow me to, I'd love to, in terms of that foundation, just define those 4 emotional milestones. And we can talk around them as much as you all would want to, but I think this is really where it starts. We talk about first the milestone of vocabulary and just the importance of helping kids develop what we call emotional literacy. And that's really nothing more than just the ability to understand what I'm feeling, to understand and be able to name what I'm experiencing in life. That's really vocabulary. And the second is the milestone of perspective. And that's learning to put all of life in the right category. And so think about it a little like the pain scale in the ER. I've got to be able to identify my pain accurately if the doctor's going to be able to treat me accurately. I need to know the difference between 1 pain and 10 pain. And the same is true with our emotional experience. I want to understand clearly that a 1 event in life is losing my car keys, and a 10 event in life is losing a family member. And I don't want to respond to every insignificant event in life as if it's in the 8 to 10 space. But I know a lot of kids and adolescents who do. They're slamming up against 10 over really insignificant events. And so developing the muscle of perspective is of great importance. The third milestone is empathy, and empathy is a well-researched foundational ingredient in all healthy interpersonal relationships, spouse to spouse, parent to child, coworker to coworker, friend to friend. We've done so much research around empathy. There's so much conversation happening, and I'm grateful for that because we just keep finding over and over. I don't really know why we keep researching it, because we have certainly all come to the same conclusion that it's needed and necessary. And so empathy is the third. And then the fourth is the milestone of resourcefulness. And that's really taking the emotion to something constructive. And that's one of the places where we're seeing the most kids, the most adolescents get roadblocked. And if I were to summarize all four of those, kind of the Cliff Notes version of what they're about, it's really about helping kids and adolescents learn to identify what they feel and what to do with it. And that sounds so simple, but again, we all know at least one grown up who didn't get there. And the statistics would tell us there are millions of grown-ups who didn't get there. And that's why, if we think about all the scary statistics that exist for kids and adolescents, we're leading the stats as adults too. I mean, we have the highest rates of addiction, of suicide, of obesity. I could run down a list of things. We are the most in-debt culture of any other time, like all the different directions that we're going to try to numb out whatever it is that we're feeling and not deal with that is evidence of where we've not developed well in this space. But rather than just camping out in that hard news, I'm really all about the good news of there's a lot we can do. There's a whole lot we can do. And we talk in the beginning of that book about how these milestones are different than the physical milestones. So we all know that we want to see that kids are crawling by a certain age, walking by a certain age, speaking by a certain age. Those are well-defined moments. These emotional milestones are different in that our kids are going to be, or should be, moving toward, progressing toward these all throughout. And the other good news with that being is that, as you're a parent listening today, if you're thinking, okay, first of all, I'm hearing some evidence of maybe where I might have missed or gotten stuck somewhere along the way in one of those four I just named, it's never too late. It's never too late for us. It's never too late for our kids. And again, because no one has fully developed empathy by the age of 12, there's still room and space for us to grow as people. And that really is the starting point. Any parent listening, we say in the introduction of that book that we can only take the kids we love as far as we've gone ourselves. Mm-hmm. We can only take the kids we love as far as we've gone. We can only offer what we have. And so that's the beginning place. If you're listening and hearing that, that's really where I would encourage you and challenge you to start with doing that work yourself. And then, and only then, are we going to work toward helping kids build those emotional muscles. But research tells us time and time again that kids learn more from observation than information. So they will develop these muscles best when they can see it on the grown-ups they trust. And if they can't see it on the grown-ups they trust, it's incredibly hard to develop it. So that's the beginning point. And then again, once we've done that work ourselves, we can really help the kids we love and accelerate that process because they get a chance to see it on a daily basis.
Yeah. So what does that look like to see it on a daily basis? I mean, can you give some maybe concrete examples of that?
I'd love to. And I'm all about making it as easy and as manageable as possible. I want anyone listening not to hear those four as a whole separate to-do list with 10 more books that I need to read and 25 more podcasts I need to listen to. Like, yeah, I want you to know you're very likely already doing these things. I just would encourage parents listening to maybe turn up the volume or just lean in a little bit farther. So a great example would be millions of families are sitting around the dinner table together at some point during the week, hopefully many points. Anytime you share a meal together, anytime you share time together, and we're just checking in with each other as a family on how was your day? What were the highs and lows? That right there is opportunity for developing all four of those. Just sitting around the dinner table talking about our day. So when kids are getting a chance to listen to their siblings report in and having to wait, like, just wait, it's not my turn to talk right now, I'm having to listen, they're developing empathy right there. As they're hearing their parents talk about their day and hopefully folding in more emotional vocabulary rather than saying my day was fine. We always laugh and say fine is nowhere on the feelings chart. Fine is an acronym for feelings in need of expression. So parents listening, don't say fine, but say, I felt sad today. I think I said something that hurt a friend's feelings and I didn't mean to. I felt embarrassed today. I had to give a presentation virtually to the board of directors and I didn't feel prepared. Looking for opportunity where we can fold in more emotional vocabulary. And then with resourcefulness, saying things like, I was feeling a lot of stress and I went out on a run, and it was amazing how different I
Mhm.
felt 20 minutes later. Like that, knowing that that's landing on kids when they can hear evidence of those kinds of things with their parents. When kids have an opportunity to hear their mom say, I felt really anxious. I picked up the phone and called a friend that I trust and who speaks truth into my life. And it was amazing how different I felt 30 minutes later after we talked and she prayed over me. So those kinds of things are those kinds of opportunities are developing these emotional muscles in amazing ways. And again, that's something we're doing on the everyday. And then think about all the other everyday things we're doing. When you take your dog on a walk, we're such advocates of walk with kids and pets and use that as an opportunity. And particularly as we have conversation around adolescence today, so many adolescents talk better side to side, shoulder to shoulder than they do eye to eye. And I would say, particularly for any parent of a boy, eye to eye for a boy can trigger a lot of shame and can actually take boys to a place of shutting down more rather than opening up. But if you're walking the dog and just having some conversation and he's not having to look you in the eye, a lot of times he can open up more freely. It's why teenage boys talk a little more openly. I have moms tell me all the time at night when they go in to tell them good night that sometimes oftentimes I think invite you to just, hey, will you scratch my back for a minute, or will you sit down for a minute? Because he's in the dark, he's looking the other direction. He doesn't have to look you in the eyes. And sometimes just that situation creates more safety for him to be able to talk more. So talking when we're driving in the car, looking for those opportunities of what we call unpredictability, where kids aren't expecting it. If your son's outside shooting hoops, go outside and just retrieve the ball a little bit. Ask him about his day then. That's an unpredictable moment, different than when he would most likely expect that question to be coming his way.
I just had that happen yesterday. My son was lifting weights. And so I intentionally went down there at the same time and I started folding laundry.
Good for
And
you.
just kind of putting myself in that space and just see if he was in a mood to, talk. And he was literally lifting weights, and in between sets would talk, and then he'd stop and lift another set and then talk again. And I'm just sitting there folding laundry. So he's thinking I'm kind of distracted. You know what? I'm not distracted. I was fully in the conversation, but I wasn't I wasn't eye to eye with him.
Right.
I was eye to eye with the laundry, and then he was just talking to me. So I mean, it's just funny because I literally was just doing that yesterday. And I think what you said was really good. And that is kind of put yourself in a spot where it could happen. It may not, but why not just put yourself there and see?
Absolutely. That was brilliant. And I think something else you tapped into well is, we as males are very action oriented creatures. And so I talk about boys from the beginning of their development are hardwired for activity and movement. So anytime they're in motion, it's easier for them to have conversation. And you tapped into that, like the fact that he kept doing reps and was talking more freely. That was brilliant. And I would challenge any mother listening to really lean into that wisdom, because I think it's often where we'll get a lot more. And my two colleagues I mentioned that I wrote the book with, they wrote a great book called The Back Door to Your Teen's Heart. And the first sentence of that book is my favorite sentence. They say, to the degree that kids can predict you, they will dismiss you.
Hmm.
And I think that is so incredibly true. And what you did wisely in that moment was unpredictable. Like he just thought you were folding laundry. You all happened to be in the same space. It was unexpected. It was unpredictable. And I find those moments with adolescents tend to lend themselves to some of the best stuff, the predictable parts. I say to parents, if you get in the car, if you're picking up your 8th grader and they get in the car and immediately hear you say, how was your day? Which I think a lot of kids do. And hear me say, it's not a bad question. It may just be a bad time to ask a good question. I think it just lends itself to fine. I think they're exhausted. They're depleted. If they're boys, they're probably hungry. And so there are all these ingredients in the mix that just won't lend itself to the best conversation. I challenge parents back to that unpredictability to maybe even say to kids like, I don't know this, but my guess would be you just may be depleted right now, just mentally taxed. Like, would you like to just listen to some music on the way home? And I think the unpredictability of that might invite a little conversation. It also so honoring to just give them some space to be quiet if they need to. to just zone out for a little bit of time, to know that maybe after some quiet and then a snack and then a little time to be outdoors, that then would be a better time to check in on the day. So that's
Yeah.
unpredictability.
Noticed two things when you were talking about sitting around the dinner table. One was that the examples parents gave were about hard feelings. You didn't say, oh, I had a really fun time with my friend, and so I'm going to model what it is to have fun, because kids are having a hard time understanding the difficult feelings, is what I'm gathering from that.
Yes.
We don't need to model maybe the positive ones as much. But also, sometimes I, in my mind, think, well, I'm modeling it, like working out, for example. When I'm stressed, I go work out. So I just assume my children are making those connections in their head. And you were saying, no, I need to articulate, because I'm feeling this way, I am following it up with this action. And I don't know that every parent naturally verbalizes that. So is that something that's important for parents to point out in a way that feels as natural as possible? I think the examples you gave felt very natural to say those things. But sometimes I forget that my kids might not be connecting the dots in the same way that I am inside my own head.
That's great. And I might even back up a step, and anyone listening, you can make me the bad guy in this if you want to. You can say, I listened to this guy on a podcast today, and he talked about this idea that I want us to do as a family. And even this, let's go back to the unpredictability. I would do this after you prepare an amazing, insane pancake breakfast on a Saturday. Like, I just think everything with teenagers goes down a little bit better with good food. So,
Amen.
make waffles, make some great breakfast. And then right as things are about to end, say, hey, heard this guy talk on a podcast. Because again, everybody's well fed, slept well, slept in. We're not trying to squeeze this in maybe on a school morning before they head out. And then to say, hey, let's take 10 minutes and do this. And pass note cards around the table or a piece of paper and talk about the milestone of resourcefulness. Talk about how foundational it is that every one of us has a list, a working list of at least 5 things that help us relieve stress, that help us navigate and manage stress, because stress is universal. No person is exempt. And so sitting as a family together in that practice of coming up with your list, swapping ideas, what'd you put on yours, what works for you. And part of why I even said a working list, because I think part of having a resilient mindset is recognizing that if something's not working, I need to try something different. Think about that age-old definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over, expecting different results. So it's like, if I have a list of 5 things and I'm really only using one of the 5, I should take off 4 and refresh my ideas at this point. But I loved your point there of just, they need to know we have a working list. And when we are sharing those things, both what we're experiencing and what we're doing with it, it also gives kids permission to know that emotions are human. They don't just stop when you finish adolescence. Like, they're true for every living human being in whatever stage of life. And again, our only job is to figure out how to name what we're feeling and figure out what to do with it. And so having that working list, and I challenge kids in my office to really put that somewhere that is easily accessible. I encourage a lot of kids, because most teenagers have phones, take a photo of it so you've got it with you at all times. Hang a copy on a bathroom mirror, back of a closet door, somewhere where if you are just swimming in emotion, if you are emotionally charged and you can't even remember what's on your list, you don't have to do that work. Like, you've got it down somewhere. You can just reference that. Oh yeah, I do remember. Petting the dog helps me. Going outside and taking a run, doing 5 minutes of yoga, whatever it may be for you. And I think that's different for every person. I will say this, as families are even thinking about the possibility of doing something like this, I do have a couple of rules of thumb when I challenge families to do this practice and to create these lists. One would be, and teenagers hate this, so make me the bad guy here, you cannot have anything on your list that involves a screen. Screens are an escape, not a coping skill. I'm not saying you can't use screens. That's fine. I want you to have access to screens in healthy ways with good limits, but not for this purpose. And so many teenagers will say that to me, like, it helps me to just scroll on Instagram. It helps me to play video games. It helps me to know what you're doing there is checking out. And so coping is effortful. It involves effort of sometimes. Scrolling is effortless. It's a numbing out. And so make that differentiation known. I think that's important to note. And again, make me the bad guy when you talk that through. And plenty of kids will argue, and I let them, like, well, yeah, but it does kind of settle me. And I'm like, it numbs you. It doesn't settle you. Like, we've been able to look, we've done very close research around what happens in a person neurologically in the process of just scrolling. And it's not a calming of the brain effect that happens in that moment. So there's still an activation that's happening that doesn't bring about this settling of the brain and body. So that's kind of my first rule of thumb. My second rule of thumb is I want there to be at least 2 or 3 things on your list of 5 that involve movement of some kind, because movement is a well-researched practice that accomplishes 2 things. 1, it resets the brain. 2, it releases a lot of what we call the feel-good chemicals. All of us know that. Like, it just releases more serotonin into the body. So it's a quick, fast, effective way that I can reset my brain and release some of the feel-good chemicals. And then I also would say, kind of my third rule of thumb is I would love for there to be some deep breathing as one of the stopping off points, because I'm all about the quickest, most effective ways that I can accomplish what I want to accomplish. And deep breathing, for all the conversation that's happening, for anyone who's wondering, like, is it really as effective as they say? It really is. Like, it only takes 20 seconds. 20 seconds of some deep breathing can reset the brain. So that's just our fastest strategy. So I'm like, why not put that one on there if we know it's going to work quick and effectively? So those are kind of 3 rules of thumb. Now, I will say to some of the adolescents who'll battle pretty hard with me about the technology thing, I'll bargain with them in this way. I'll say, okay, here's the deal. If you can give me a good 6 to 8 weeks of nothing involving technology on your top 5 list, and you really get those down, and I can see evidence of that, you're practicing those, things look different, your parents are reporting some difference, I will let you add to it. There are a lot of mindfulness apps, the Pause app, Mindspace, Headspace. Those are great apps. And so that's kind of advanced skills. That's like PhD level stuff. And with kids who practice long and hard, I'll let them add that in, but only if they've really practiced without it, that I think they've earned that then. And they won't necessarily fall back on just the empty scrolling when they grab their phone, but they will genuinely use something like the Headspace app.
That is really practical and helpful and doable
Yes.
for every family. I really love that. One of the things I was thinking about when you were talking is, and we can bring in, Enneagram or whatever you want to call it, but some kids are just more wired to be in touch with their feelings than others. And some are just more wired to be a little more shut down, a little more buttoned up, a little, kind of closed. And so, can you give us some helpful practices that we can use with those kids that are just harder to draw out? They're just not as natural with, I mean, even if you're kind of doing all those things, you're trying to model, you're trying to, help them identify, but they're just struggling. What do you do in that situation?
I love that you mentioned the Enneagram, and it's a tool that I really believe in personally and professionally. We use that in our practice. And our experience has been adolescents generally, there's certainly a few exceptions to this rule, but generally speaking, love it, because let's laugh together. All right. Adolescent, that is a period in time, a pocket of development when kids are pretty self-absorbed.
Yeah.
We were as well. So if you don't remember that about yourself, trust me, you were. And the thing about the Enneagram is, like, it's all about studying yourself, talking about yourself, figuring out things about yourself. And so it's like, why wouldn't we use something valuable like that in that moment when kids love it? And so I'm a huge advocate. If you're listening and you've not had a chance to really explore that tool, I could not recommend it to you highly enough. And if you've just kind of edged into that space but haven't done a deep dive, lean farther, because I genuinely believe I've seen it. I've sat front row for decades now and seen it change families. I've seen it change marriages. I've seen it change the game of parenting, because it is all about building awareness. And to the degree, to your great question, that I have awareness of myself, the direction that I bend, how I see the world, and that I'm starting to understand that for my kids, it can change the game. Now, with that said, for anyone listening, you know, Enneagram experts would say, and I 100% agree, that it's not anyone's job to assign a number to another person. So we're always going to give other people permission and space and room to explore their number. I'm not going to assign that to anyone. They would also say that kids are developing people, and we want to be very careful with the assigning numbers as kids are growing and developing, that we're just giving them room to figure out all of who they are. So what we do, rather than, helping kids at 16, 17, 18, say, come to a conclusion of I am this, is what directions do you lean? As we study this tools, we use this tools, we explore this tool, what are you figuring out about yourself? Because that's enough. And that's where kids can learn, to your question. Like, I have a tendency to kind of get stuck in my head. I have a tendency to go inward. I have a tendency to get lost in research. I have a tendency to, one of the things that a lot of Enneagram experts would say is that even if we can't identify our kid's number, we can at least likely identify which stance they're in. Are they in the aggressive stance, or the dependent stance, or the withdrawing stance? And so for folks in the withdrawing stance, you lean in some directions that are important to pay attention to. The same is true for every stance. And then if you want to, I would also say to anyone listening who's done a good bit of work around the Enneagram, your number, you understand a lot about it. Maybe you studied wings. I think stance work is some of the best stuff. And I don't think you could spend enough time listening to podcast. I think Suzanne Stabile, who wrote The Road Back to You and The Path Between Us, one of my favorite teachers on this. I've done some studying under her, and I think she's outstanding. And her content is so accessible, and her content on the podcast, and she has some videos too on stance work, I think is such valuable content. And what we learn is, let me just give a quick personal example, and maybe this will kind of whet your appetite. Like, I am a 1 on the Enneagram. So I'm in the dependent stance, and the name given to the 1, if you're listening, is the perfectionist or the reformer. We see all the things that are wrong in the world, and we want to make it right. And let me drill down even on what that looks like for me as a parent. I walk into a space, I walk into any room in my house, and I immediately see what's wrong. I see a bed that's unmade. I see dirty clothes laying on the floor. I see counter that hasn't been wiped down. Like, I can't not see those things. So I'm not even going to try to not see them, because that's impossible. What I am going to do is develop practices around seeing that allow me to be who I want to be in this world. Otherwise, in my early days before I studied the Enneagram, would walk in the house and be like, hey, gang, who forgot to unload the dishwasher? And my very sweet wife would say, Dad meant to say, hello, everybody. How was your day? Like, I could forget to even greet people because I'm so task oriented. And so one of the newer practices I have developed out of my oneness and seeing everything that's wrong is I'm spending less time in my teenage son's bedroom. Because for any of you out there who have teenage son, it both looks and smells a little bit like a frat house. And I don't love that look or smell, really. And so I don't want, my sons are seniors in high school. They're going to be leaving for college in a matter of months. I do not want my relationship with them at any point, but certainly in their last year at home, to be defined around the things that they did not follow through with to my satisfaction. I just don't want it. I want their last year at home to be defined by how much I love them, how much I'm going to miss them, how invested I am in helping them find their way to this next season of what God has for them. And I just don't want it to be about that. So the Enneagram has been so valuable in helping me understand that within the context of parenting. Where it's helping me personally right now is, I mentioned stance work. I'm in the dependent stance, and I am what's called thinking repressed. And so that means I do a lot of feeling, which is great for a therapist. That's really good for my job. And I do a lot of doing, which makes me very efficient at home. I talked about it. I'm a taskmaster. but I don't factor in a lot of what's called productive thinking. I have a lot of thoughts. In fact, I have a very active inner critic as a 1. So I have 1,000 thoughts, but they aren't necessarily productive thoughts. They're very critical thoughts. They're judgmental thoughts. They're, as I mentioned, corrective thoughts, but they aren't the kind of thoughts I really want to be circling around. So I have to do a lot of extra work because I've been in that direction to figure out I have a lot of unproductive thinking going on, more than I'm even aware of. And if I'm not paying attention to that, I can end up operating out of that at all times. So thank you for letting me go on and on about that for a few minutes. I just wanted to put some feet to the importance in my mind of using that tool and how I think it could change the game and all the different ways. You know, one of my kids is a 6, for example. And so they're swimming with a lot of thoughts around fear at different points. And we came up with a phrase for this particular kid in my household that they can get caught in what we've called the mind spiral. And so they're just kind of spiraling in all this, what if, but what if this happened? Oh gosh, this is probably going to happen now. And we're using the Enneagram as a way to just be able to build some practices and tools to help this kid learn to realize, actually, I can get caught in that mind spiral like that. Like it can just happen. I'm not even aware it's happening, and swimming in that. And I want to be able to pay attention to it. So those are just a few examples of how I think the Enneagram can help draw out those kids, to your question, and help kids develop and help parents develop awareness in a way that I think can change the game of relationship.
Thank you. I think that's really just, I think as parents are looking at like, how do I help my child? It's a tool. I mean, and I think a lot of people, their criticism of the Enneagram is I don't want to be boxed in. But I think if you just look at it as a tool that you can use, then that becomes something really helpful. It's not the only tool you have to use.
No.
It's a tool. And why not use, from my standpoint, why not use every tool in the toolbox that we can, right? Because we're doing
Absolutely.
our best to help these kids, and they are growing up in a time that is difficult. And we're seeing that, like you mentioned, we're seeing that statistically. This is not like it was when we were growing up. It when they say you don't understand, it's different, they're right. We don't understand because it is different. And
Yes.
so why not use every tool that we can? And I think this whole idea of helping them get in touch with kind of those inner places and who they are and how they're operating and their motivations. And I really like that you talked about the stances, because that's something I don't hear people talk about a lot. So that was really helpful.
Mm,
And for those of you listening that don't know what he's talking about, like if you just start, listening to some podcasts, you'll quickly pick it up.
you will. And
Mhm.
I couldn't recommend the Enneagram Journey enough. That Suzanne's podcast. That'd be a great, easy place to start. And she'll even point you in some specific directions depending on where you are in your journey of understanding the Enneagram. But yes, that's exactly what it is. And I think it just helps every one of us build awareness, which I believe we desperately need to be able to be all of who we want to be in the context of the relationships that are the most important to us in our marriages, in our parenting, in our friendships. And again, inviting, I think in our world too. Oh my goodness, I think our world could be so different right now if we were operating more out of a place of awareness and empathy. I think it would change the game. So I believe it's an invaluable tool. I really do. And I think it's also a tool in my experience, my own experience in working with families too, that allows me to just deepen my relationship with God. It allows me to understand more about my own hardwiring, the way He's formed me and created me, and formed and created those around me. And that example I just gave about the mind spiral, like I have so much empathy the longer I've studied that for this particular kid. Like that child I love of mine, they don't want to get stuck in that mind spiral. It's not anything they want, but it's just as instinctive to them as it is for me to have critical thoughts. So I have so much compassion and empathy, and my response, I believe, is different now having used that tool. So awareness and empathy, I think, are the two things you will walk away with if you're open to leaning in.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
helps take away the personalization. When someone's responding a certain way, you can understand, oh, they're responding this way because that's how they're wired, not because of me.
Yes.
And so I think that can take some of the conflict down. I do have teenagers who have pushed back against it, who
Mhm.
have not wanted to participate because of the whole boxed in thing and because we talk about it so much in our house. And so it still, though, has opened up conversations around, okay, but this is what I see in you. And so I wonder if maybe you lean this direction because you're so good at this. And so I think even for the family where the mom tries and it kind of gets pushed back, it can still be used in a good way to affirm your child in some ways where you see some strength patterns,
Yes.
um, and not just focus on these are the dark side of each number, but these are the strengths of who you are. And so I just wonder if you might lean this way. And as you grow up, I'm excited to see that. That's how we've tried to,
Good
to
for
funnel
you.
it for the kids who've been like, no, I'm not going to do that.
I love that language of I wonder. I think it's such a great way to operate within what you're learning rather than you are, I wonder. I love that. I would also say, hearing you share that, if you're a parent listening and you feel like you've tried to introduce that and it's been met with resistance or roadblocked in some way, rather than just slamming up against that, I might, again, back to that resilient mindset, let's rethink the game. I might consider ushering in a different voice to introduce that. And we talk so often in our practice about how that's so often all that we're doing as therapists. Like we're saying some of the not just same things, exact same things that parents are saying, but it's just a different voice. Kids are more open to hearing the feedback or being introduced to something like the Enneagram because it's a different voice. And I've loved how many high schools are using the Enneagram in their curriculum or how many youth groups are introducing it. And so sometimes it's just a new voice
Mhm.
introducing that kids start to become a little more open. And even there, if it's done in a peer experience, like, well, everybody in my advisory took the Enneagram. And so of course they're going to be a part of it at that point, or
Mhm.
everybody in youth group, we're going to do it on this retreat or this over this 4-week period. So I would challenge parents, if you're experiencing that, think about praying and ushering in a new voice that could help kids build some of that awareness and what context might invite that.
It's really good. I like
Mhm.
that.
Yeah.
Well, David, for the last question today, I really do want to get to this one. And that is, I've heard people say that emotions can be advocates for the worst. So, for example, like depression can lead to doing nothing, anger can lead to or trigger retaliation, or shame can cause secrecy. And so and there's this idea that emotions are bad leaders sometimes and they're better followers. And so, how do we I thought that was really practical what you said about creating a list, and here's what you do. But if someone's in a deep depressive state, they often won't take that initiative to go pet the dog or go take a
Yes.
walk because they just all motivation is gone. How do you kind of help kids wrap around this idea that sometimes our emotions are leading us in places that really are unhealthy and we need to stop letting them lead?
Yes. It's a great question. I don't know if you can see, the two of you can see over my shoulder. I have this green convertible sitting on a stool back behind me that I use as an illustration in my office a lot with kids and teenagers. And I will say, and I heard this ages ago, and it made me laugh so hard, that emotions are like children. And if we think about children in a vehicle, we do not want them driving the car. And we certainly don't want to stuff them in the trunk. Like neither place is beneficial for them.
Oh,
Where
that's
are kids the
good.
safest in a car? Like they're the safest fastened in the back seat. Like they're with us, we're aware of them, but they're not in charge of us. And to your great question, I know a lot of individuals, not just adolescents, but I know some adults who their emotions are driving the car or flying the plane at all times. Like they are dictating so much of their response to life. And then I know a lot of people who are trying to pack them in the trunk and pretend like they're not there. And neither space is beneficial. Like we want to be aware of them, but they aren't informing everything. And I would say, secondly, back to even me talking a little bit about the stance work and the me being thinking repressed, there's some individuals who are feeling repressed. There's some numbers that are. And so that would be an important thing for that person to know, because that could be such that there is this boiling anger because they're not willing or able or skilled in the place of accessing those emotions, there are going to be some folks who are doing repressed. And that could make that example you shared that much harder. I think with any individual experiencing depression, it can drive a lack of motivation and apathy that makes it hard to take the steps we need to take to put one foot in front of the other. But there again, if you're within the withdrawing stance, all the more, because you're doing repressed. And so it's hard to, you can make a great list, but you cannot figure out how to execute it successfully. That takes us right back to the wisdom of the Enneagram, and to the degree that I would know that about myself. Whereas I, for example, I'm doing dominant. Like, that's the first place that I go, but I'm not always doing things that are productive for me. I laugh. My most classic example of this is when I was in graduate school and it was time for me to write my thesis, which felt like the most overwhelming task I had taken on to date. And my wife made this amazing breakfast because she knew I was about to sit down for this full weekend experience of tackling this. She said, "Sweetheart, I'm even going to leave the house. I don't want you to be distracted. I'm going to be gone. You got the whole space quiet to yourself." She comes home like 8 hours later to check in, see how I'm doing. And I said, "I've got something to show you." I walk her out to the garage and I have cleaned the entire garage, including the lawnmower. Like, who cleans the lawnmower? Why is that even needed or necessary? It's going to get grass on it again. I'd hung all the tools. I'd mopped the floor in the garage. Who cares? But it's like, there it is. I was doing all of this activity. I was sweaty, plenty to show for my efforts, but did not do one thing that I needed to do, nothing toward my thesis. And so there again, every one of us bends in certain directions, and understanding those things that might get in the way as we think about our emotional journey, unique to thinking, feeling, and doing, some of that stance work will reveal a lot in that space and is important to note. And I think back to the example of the car, allows us to more accurately check where we're putting things in the driver's seat, in the trunk, or in the back seat.
Yeah, that's a great visual. Really, really helpful. Thank you for that. Well, David, this has been so wonderful, as you just always are such a wealth of information, but also heart and understanding and compassion. Yeah, we're big fans. We're big fans around here. So thank you so
Well,
much for
right
coming
back
on.
at you. I'm a big fan. You all have opened up such a rich space for parents to engage in thoughtful conversation. So it's genuinely an honor when I get to talk with you both. Thanks for inviting me back.
Okay. Well, thanks, David. We so appreciate it. Have a great day. Have a great day with the dogs.
Take care.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.